Hello there, I'm Noel Hacegaba, Chief Operating Officer at the Port of Long Beach. Welcome to Supply Chain Insight, where we explore the latest trends, issues, and news in the supply chain with top industry leaders, experts, and influencers. Our objective is to bring you this insight you need to help you keep your cargo moving. Today's business executives expect a lot from their supply chains: efficiency, velocity, flexibility, cost management, and operational excellence. Supply Chain Insight brings a supply chain to you, one segment at a time, to explore new approaches and innovative solutions that will help you and the Port of Long Beach deliver greater value to our customers and partners. In today's episode, we will talk about an innovative initiative developed by the U.S. Department of Transportation to create a shared common picture of the network of supply chains. The name of this initiative is FLOW, which stands for Freight Logistics Optimization Works. A clever name, I might add. And our guest is the architect of FLOW himself, Andrew Petrisin. Andrew Petrisin serves as the advisor for multimodal freight at USDOT. Among his responsibilities, Andrew is working to stand up the new Office of Multimodal Freight Infrastructure and Policy Office, also known as the Freight Office, which was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Andrew also leads the FLOW initiative to improve data sharing and transparency across the supply chain. Previously, he worked as a consultant for WSP and was a project lead for Accelerator for America. Andrew, welcome to Supply Chain Insight. We are thrilled to have you on today to talk about FLOW, which has really blossomed into a major national initiative in a very short period of time. I'm among the fortunate few to have heard of FLOW during its infancy when you were still finalizing the name, and this is probably a good place to start for our discussion. So Andrew, how was FLOW born, and how did you come up with the name?
Well, first of all, thank you, Noel, for having me on Supply Chain Insights and for the Port of Long Beach being a founding member of FLOW. FLOW was born within the construct of the White House Supply Chain Disruption Task Force, with this idea that USDOT could provide a valuable public service to preview, right, and prevent future supply chain disruption. So much of the work that the task force was doing was bringing people together across the industry, right, to understand situational awareness and to mitigate disruption. So we really thought, building on that more manual process we had in place with a series of calls, we could standardize, maybe make digital some of that collaboration for our collective benefit. And the name, actually, I will say, I came up with on a train ride home after work in early 2022. This is my first time working in government, and I quickly learned of the government's affinity for acronyms. So I knew we needed to have one. And it turns out it describes the program quite well.
That's terrific, Andrew. Well, I think you certainly picked the right acronym for this, and all the credit to you for coming up with that name. And I do recall all those meetings early on during the supply chain crisis. We were talking once, actually almost 3 times to 4 times a week. You know, the old saying is that necessity is the mother of invention. And I think the experience we all went through during the supply chain crisis really brought this, it really opened up the door for an initiative like this. So credit to you and USDOT for recognizing the need and launching this initiative. So the lack of end-to-end visibility predates the supply chain crisis, but I think most people would agree that it was magnified many times over during the recent disruptions. How does FLOW help the nation's transportation system?
So that's a great question, Noel. FLOW fundamentally is about providing information in supply chain that the industry, might not otherwise or wouldn't otherwise have access to, right? And to use that information to build into your existing planning tools. So, more specifically, right, we're aggregating future demand information. So think purchase orders from importers, bookings from ocean carriers, from across industry providers, right? And providing that back out to all the FLOW participants to see future freight flows, right? So this isn't historic information modeled forward. It's this true demand signal, right? That's industry wide. And to give you a taste of that, right? For bookings, we're capturing around 75% of kind of import cargo, starting about a month and a half out as it's booked, and where it's flowing to and how it's getting there. Complementing that is really kind of what we call, supply side information, capacity side information. So terminal and chassis availability in particular right now, alongside some throughput information. And the idea is, right, with this kind of novel data set, individual participants can integrate that into their existing workflows to better understand future throughput, right? So that collectively, right, we as an industry and we as a country can be more proactive in addressing potential disruptions.
And I really like the way that you described that, Andrew, because, when we talk about the lack of end-to-end visibility, it means different things to different people. But your approach through Flow is to really bring value to the broader national transportation system. I think that's a key distinction. And that brings me to my next question. There have been a number of initiatives and efforts that have emerged in recent years related to data sharing and data transparency. How would you say Flow is different from and complementary to the FMC's Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, for example, and other platforms and solutions introduced by the private sector?
So another great question, and for me, this really gets at the heart of the Flow effort. You mentioned, being there at the beginning, right, when we started. And when we started, we really were centered around kind of asking two key questions, right? What's the value proposition of this data sharing in the first place, right, in terms of what we want to do together? And then what is the unique role of USDOT, right? So why does USDOT have to do this, right? What is the kind of unique value add of the department, the federal government? And to maybe take a quick detail into that, right? There are three things we talked about early on that really kind of are unique to USDOT as an institution, right? One is around data privacy laws, protecting data from legal discovery, kind of operational and profit neutrality, as well as just kind of the convening authority, right, to get people together from across the transportation industry. And once we really have these two questions kind of answered in earnest, Flow really started, right? And we started really focusing in on, what I've heard you call before kind of an early warning system, which I think aptly describes, what we're doing here. And as I look at that in terms of kind of differentiation and kind of, the complementariness to, say, FMC's important efforts, I would just say really, Flow is really a product, right? It's a product it's a tool with an online login, right, that industry can participate in and pull data from. So it's not a standard per se, right? There are standard data tables of, how we intake data, but it's not about standardizing nomenclature around kind of cargo status and location. If there were a universal standard, we'd use it, right? Just like others. And with respect to industry, I would say, our key kind of, value add or differentiator and kind of really around focus on being complementary is the breadth of what we're able to collect and provide back out, right? Because of the, non-competitive nature of the department, we are really aggregating information across competitors, right? So you have competitors, sharing information kind of with us and then to each other through an aggregation. So the Flow data really, in turn, how we see it complements, right, not replaces data an individual company would have, back to our kind of first principle around, our aim here is to provide data that, otherwise would be inaccessible. And the overall goal of providing a platform to really spur industry innovation, right, and kind of commercialization for overall supply chain resilience.
Yeah, thanks for that clarity, Andrew. And I think one of the reasons why I think Flow has been so successful thus far is you've been able to clarify exactly what your goal and objective is, right? Because again, when we talk about end-to-end visibility or the lack of visibility or data transparency, data sharing, it means different things to different folks. And along the same lines, it's important for our audience to understand what Flow is and what it's not. For example, Flow is not a track and trace tool. Can you help our audience understand how Flow is different from a track and trace tool?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. Flow is not a track and trace tool. And if it were, it would definitely, violate what I just said earlier about it being complementary, right, not competitive to kind of private sector solutions. So, Flow is not a system or, an effort or a product where you plug in your container number and know where your container is. I'd say, in fact, it's almost the opposite, right? It's about knowing where everyone else's equipment is, right? It's what's the total inbound cargo in addition to yours, right? What are the total amount of chassis available, not just the ones you are using, right? And why is this important? Because most of the impact on your supply chain is going to be outside of your control, right? It's actions a neighbor is taking, right? And as you know well, as we know well, so much of a complicating factor of supply chain is the interdependence of it all.
That's right.
Right, and you use the same equipment, as your neighbor, right? So a chassis used by one company, used by another company, maybe the next day, right? So what Flow gives you and what we're working towards continuing to build out is a picture of the system, right? So you see how that impacts you as an individual so that you in turn can better plan.
Yeah, and I like the analogy that I've used in the past, Andrew, to describe the supply chain, right? It's really a system of systems, and that's what makes it so unique and at the same time so complex. Someone once referred to our industry as rocket science, and I said, no, it's not. It's actually more complex than that. But that's for another time, another day. Let me ask you this question, Andrew. Is there anything like Flow that currently exists in other industries?
Yeah, so I'd say, USDOT actually has a kind of long history of doing some of these voluntary, data sharing kind of agreements, and just reinforcing a Flow's a voluntary effort, right, between government and industry as a partnership. Since the 1990s, FAA has actually worked with the air carriers on a voluntary data sharing effort to optimize essentially the fluidity of the national airspace. And we in Flow have taken a lot of good lessons from them on what's worked, how to work collaboratively with industry, and how to deliver useful data products. So, in my kind of estimation, we are really, I think, building on a history here at USDOT, if a niche history, right, of doing, this type of work, and, really excited to, to keep that work going.
Yeah, that's terrific, Andrew. And the advantage for the Marine Supply Chain Network is that you have been able to take lessons learned from the application of something similar in the airline industry and apply it to our industry, which again is a bit unique, a little more complex. So from our own experience here in Long Beach with the Supply Chain Information Highway, we know the challenges in moving efforts like these forward. It's not necessarily the technology itself, but it's really in getting the stakeholders who own or control the data to share it. Under your leadership, Andrew, Flow has enlisted the support and participation of many stakeholders across the supply chain. And you and USDOT have been very successful in doing that, hosting meetings at your headquarters, at the White House. I've had the pleasure of being at some of those. And again, just our compliments to you, because to me, that seems to be the biggest barrier, right? It's getting people to feel comfortable in sharing that data. What has been your approach to get the stakeholders to get comfortable with this?
Well, it's a great question. And, I think we have seen the core challenge since day one really as a challenge of trust, right? And a challenge of the value proposition, right? With technical components, of course, right? Data has to be shared, it has to be aggregated, anonymized, and distributed. And there's really two things I'd kind of maybe build on there is, since the very beginning, we've taken, as I know you've been a part of, Noel, a very collaborative approach, right? It's not USDOT telling industry, what we want for our sake, or much less telling industry what they want, right? It really is working with partners like the Port of Long Beach and others to tell us what they want, right? And kind of building consensus. And our job really is around building consensus, prioritizing action, and delivery of that useful product. That way, those who are sharing their data, right, are in turn part of the solution as well. We think this builds trust, builds buy-in, and kind of builds champions for the program. And the second piece is really just about implementation, right? I think, my team's heard me say it over and over, but, we talk about kind of value early, value often, right? And there is, a cost and benefit to participate, and, the benefit has to be greater than the time, right? That's allocated to it. And, that's difficult. This is a big, gnarly challenge that, we're all, trying to solve. And, it really is kind of the challenges of a startup, within the context of the federal government. And the last thing I'd say is, it goes without saying, but the federal data privacy laws do help, of course, and that the more people join, the richer the data set gets, and so there's incentive to bring a plus one, if you will.
No, that's excellent, Andrew. And I would also add that the executive level sponsorship within USDOT. I mean, I've been in meetings with, Secretary Buttigieg, as well as the port and supply chain envoys, starting with John Picari and then General Steve Lyons. They've all been there. They've all embraced this. They're very supportive. And I think that also helps to build that level of trust, right? That this is something that was designed and developed and deployed to help the broader national system. But again, credit to you, because you're the one who's interacting, you're making the phone calls, you're sending the emails. You're going to conferences and enlisting the support. You know, the Port of Long Beach is proud to be a founding member of Flow. And, you know, what segments of the supply chain are currently involved? And who else would you like to see get involved in the future?
Yeah, so we're engaged really with, let's say, participants or kind of operators in the supply chain. Really anyone who touches an ocean container, right? Starting with the BCO purchase order and importer of that container, all the way to some of the 3PL warehouses. We now kind of have participation from the top 5 U.S. container ports, 7 of largest 11 ocean carriers, kind of major IEPs, and about half of the top 20, importers. So I think we're off to a good start, right? And we want to continue to build that momentum. We'd love to get more motor carriers involved, warehousers, and regular conversation with the railroads. So that's really our focus right now. Is continuing to kind of build momentum, continue to get traction, and then of course deliver on the promise that we make to the group.
Well, there are about 23,000 motor carriers here in San Pedro Bay, Andrew. So whenever you're ready, let me know, and we'll open those doors for you. But the other thing that you've done very successfully is tap the networks of different associations, because that gives you that forum to be able to address, right, a large number of folks in different segments, different nodes, and educate them on what this is. So credit to you on that as well, whether it's IANA or AAPA or some of these other venues. You've been very good at participating and leveraging those forums. So for those who are watching and are getting interested, and I expect there are a lot of folks in our audience who are very receptive to this message, how can someone get involved with Flow?
So this is an easy one. You just start by emailing us at flow@dot.gov. We have a team that will then set up an orientation call. So whoever is out there listening, and for those that are, we'd love to tell you more about the program, the product, and where we're going moving forward.
Terrific. And if you do send Andrew and his team an email, make sure you let him know that it was Supply Chain Insight that you got that email from. Terrific. So what's next for Flow? And what are some of your plans for the next 12 to 24 months, Andrew?
So, it's a great question. We're really continuing to kind of refine the product, right? So, today there's data available, working on refining that, making sure, we have good quality control, quality assurance in place so that folks can begin to use it. And, onboarding new participants. I think this coming week we're adding Sony and Kroger, for example. On the data side, really focused on kind of normalizing some of the purchase order information, right? And having that out by the end of the year, in addition to the booking, terminal, and chassis data that's currently available. And from there, what we're really focused on, back to kind of what I said, is just, quality control, reliability, building out some of the use cases that we started this fall and this summer with some of our participants, so that they'll begin to be able to use this really kind of V1 product, and really put it to good use in the spring. In 12 months, I'd love to see Flow data just in the kind of regular workflows, right? For supply chain data analysts at our particular, participating companies, that's success, right? For us here, kind of building resilience into the system where things really, novel way. And in 24 months, we'd love to see, new parties, exporters, for example, right, added to the system as well, as we continue to build out, this kind of overview of the systems of system, as you noted earlier.
That's terrific. Exciting plans ahead for sure, Andrew. And again, here in Long Beach, however we can support, count us in. Happy to support this initiative. So let me switch gears a little bit, because Flow is not 100% of what you do. You're a very busy person. In addition to leading Flow, you're also standing up the multimodal freight office. Tell us how that's going, and how the freight office will help US DOT further support the nation's transportation network.
So, that's correct. We're really excited about the new multimodal freight office. The new office is the home of Flow and a lot of great other work that we're started here at US DOT. One initiative in particular we're excited about is continuing to inform future freight infrastructure investments, right? Either at the federal level, right, decisions we're making and discretionary process, as well as at the state level, with funding that the state might have and the state's partners. Each state, as you as you well know, or has a state freight investment plan, right? So we're beginning conversations with each state, including California, who we spoke to just the other week, on how to best utilize those plans, right? How to best utilize that existing investment information to inform strategic investments, looking at the freight network, really on a corridor basis, right, and kind of a national basis, recognizing that your neighbors, we're talking about neighbors earlier in the kind of operational sense, right? But as we think about neighbors from state to state, right, and different investments they're making, beginning to think about that more as a system, right, and kind of a national system, and how do we kind of, make the smartest and best investments collaboratively. But there's definitely more to come here. We look forward to sharing. Also to say, continue to build the team here at USDOT in the freight office. Just appointed our new Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multimodal Freight, Allison Dane Camden. Really excited to have her on board and join the kind of growing team we have here in the Office of the Secretary.
That's terrific, Andrew. And we certainly look forward to hearing more about this office in the coming months and years. And personally, I'm very excited about this freight office. It's something that we've been advocating for years. And to me, it couldn't come at a better time because thanks to the administration, the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are historic amounts of funding. And having the freight office is a good way to ensure that all those monies, all those funds are being maximized. You're optimizing them, right? To ensure that the national transportation system is benefiting from that. So again, our compliments, hats off to you and your team as you continue to stand that up. So Andrew, I want to give you the last word. Is there anything else you're working on or anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered in our conversation?
No, nothing really else I would to add other than a big thank you to you for your continued collaboration with USDOT from the very early days of the administration, from the early days of the White House Supply Chain Disruption Task Force. Port of Long Beach has been a partner, and just appreciate you all. Of course, appreciate your engagement in Flow, and to all of our other participants as well. Right, Flow is a team sport, right? Supply chain is a team sport, and we're just looking forward to continuing the hard work together to build a more resilient supply chain, more competitive economy here in the U.S. So, thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you, Andrew. And I have to say, and I'm not just saying this because you're across from me virtually, but it really has been just a delight and pleasure to work with you and all of your colleagues at USDOT. What we all went through together, the supply chain crisis, it was not the most pleasant experience from an operational standpoint, but the collaboration, the convening, the facilitation that USDOT, the leadership that you all brought. And again, from Secretary Buttigieg to the port and supply chain envoys, John Picari, General Stephen Lyons, yourself, it really brought the entire supply chain together. And I'm convinced that we were able to navigate through that in large part because of the administration. So again, hats off to you. And I know I speak on behalf of the Port of Long Beach, but I also speak on behalf of the Intermodal Association of North America, the American Association of Port Authorities, the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, all these associations that make it their daily mission to improve transportation, to improve the flow of cargo, owes you a great debt of gratitude to you, to USDOT, for the important role that you've played and that you continue to play. So with that, Andrew, thanks again for joining me on Supply Chain Insight. Thank you for your leadership and for all that you do in support of the supply chain and the nation's transportation system, including your work on Flow. And to our valued audience, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another episode of Supply Chain Insight, brought to you by the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Choice.